Diane, I like your background. It's very peaceful.
Thanks. Yeah, the team put it together.
What is it Scoggins? Is it Hag Lake?
I think it's somewhere on the river.
That makes sense.
Yeah,
It's
yeah.
beautiful.
There's another pretty one with Mount Hood I might switch to next. Yeah.
Hello, colleagues. I've learned today that there are an unimaginable number of ways that you can mistype the word Washington into your Zoom box. Okay, a light moment of humor as we reconvene as the Washington County Board of Commissioners in our afternoon work session. My thanks once again to all of our staff members for being incredibly flexible and nimble. We have 2 posted agenda items to talk about today, in addition to needing to close with a timely urgent matter before we adjourn for the day to get direction for me to speak either on your behalf before the Metro Council on Thursday on their SHS potential budget notes or to do so as just an individual commission member. My chief of staff was endeavoring to attend their work session, which I believe convened at 2 p.m. I have not heard from her yet, so unless you, Josh Kreitz, have an update that I don't, I assume she is still there. So we will come back to that topic later. The next item on our agenda is the Homeless Encampment Management Plan. And once again, I want to thank commissioners and staff members for their flexibility on topics today. So I just, for the record and the recording, Clerk Moss, I assume we're recording A-OK today because you have not interrupted me.
Yep, we are all good, going perfectly, Madam Chair.
Going strong with the team's help. Yay, Team Washington County. This is Chair Catherine Harrington for the recording. I know people can see it visually, but nonetheless, I am joined by Commissioners Jerry Willey, Commissioner Pam Trees, Commissioner Nafisa Fai, and Commissioner Roy Rogers. So I'd like to turn it over to our great interdisciplinary team with Sia Lindstrom, our interim assistant county administrator, Marnie Kyle, our director of health and human services, John Cook, our undersheriff, and Josh Kreitz, our assistant director of housing. I'll turn the mic over to you folks. Thank you.
Terrific. Thank you, Chair Harrington. Board of Commissioners, for the record, my name is Sia Lindstrom. As the chair mentioned, I'm the interim assistant county administrator. I'm going to lead us off this afternoon together with Marnie, Josh, and John. I also want to mention we're grateful to staff from multiple departments for their continued work and engagement on this really important issue. Specifically, I want to mention support services. Greg Wyman, in particular, in facilities, has had the yeoman's lift on this. Julie McLeod in communications, Brad Anderson as our legal counsel, and our amazing homeless outreach staff and leadership at Project Homeless Connect. They've all had a heavy lift on this really complicated issue. Next slide, please. So over the past year, Washington County has seen a significant increase in homeless encampments. This is an extremely complex problem and requires, as we've mentioned, cross-departmental, multi-jurisdictional, and cross-sector collaboration. And as with many things, COVID has served to spotlight the scope and complexity of this problem. Our cross-departmental team today will be giving you the purpose and background on the proposal, along with the proposal itself and the budget, the proposed budget, before we're reviewing alternatives and next steps. Next slide, please. So the team is asking 3 foundational policy questions today. First is about the shelter-in-place philosophy. So shelter in place was first initiated under COVID guidance from the CDC for our homeless community members who are camping in unincorporated Washington County and for whom we're unable to offer other options, for example, shelters. Second is whether you support removal of the shelter in place encampment when their continuation becomes untenable due to public health and/or public safety concerns for both the campers and the surrounding community. And finally, do you support a multi-jurisdictional approach with our city and special district partners in Washington County? So we'll come back to these 3 foundational policy considerations at the end of the presentation. And for next steps, I'll turn it over to Marnie Kyle.
Hey, good afternoon, board. It's been a marathon day already for you. So Marnie Kyle, I'm the Director of Health and Human Services, and just one of the departments, like Sia mentioned, that has been working together to address this issue of the homeless encampments. So really the purpose of this proposal today that was developed with input from all of these different departments, HHS, the Sheriff's Office, Facility, County Council, County Admin Office, all of us working together. And the purpose of it is really to improve coordination between our departments, but also between cities, special districts, and within our communities, so that we're all communicating the same thing to whether it's the community of homeless and campers, or whether it's surrounding neighborhoods, cities, and other jurisdictions. The other thing is that we're proposing a 12-month plan that's designed for unincorporated Washington County, so that we can really understand strategically how to improve coordination across the disciplines, across the jurisdictions, learn from that, and come back at some point with a long-term sustainable program recommendation. So next slide. And I don't think I really need to convince you, and you have heard this many times, but we have seen a significant increase in the houseless camps. And we've really had a challenge in trying to balance. If we could go to the next slide, please. At least there you go. I was gonna say on my screen, it doesn't show it, but we're there now. So, and also a challenge between really how do we ensure that we're providing humane services to our homeless community at the same time that we're ensuring we have a livable community for our neighborhoods while protecting everyone from COVID-19. So incorporating those CDC guidelines is where there's times when we make that recommendation to shelter in place. Also, you may think, well, we're towards the end of COVID and isn't it going away or isn't it over? And I would say, no, it's not over. We've made huge, tremendous strides, as Chair Harrington mentioned multiple times today, actually, thank you. And we're leading the way in the state in vaccinations. We're just above 70% in Washington County. However, the homeless population is one of those really difficult to reach vulnerable populations, and also a population that may not have a lot of trust in traditional medical systems or government. And so we still have a low rate of vaccination in that population, which puts them at risk, and it also puts the greater community who hasn't been able to be vaccinated at risk. And so that's why we've come together, multiple departments, to collaborate and figure out what is the best approach to this. And I will turn it over to Josh to get us kicked off on what this 12-month proposal looks like.
Thanks, Marnie. Next slide, please. So I'm going to, for the record, my name is Josh Kreitz. I'm the Assistant Director of the Housing Department. I always have to remember that part. I'm going to cover this 12-month slide, but I'm also going to bring in my colleagues, Marnie and John, to kind of talk over this. There's a lot baked into this slide. And so the one thing I really want to highlight is just how instructive the last several months have been. So as we come to you and present to your board this afternoon, and we talk to our community, this comes after several months of learning a lot, working together, working with our community, working with our homeless population. And I think this journey together has allowed us to really learn something important, and that's respect for our homeless population who are our community members, and respect for the community members who have concerns about encampments, and striking that right balance. So as we talk about this 12-month program proposal, I want to highlight a couple areas. One is that intensive outreach and navigation. So we want to be able to go out into these homeless encampments. We want to be able to reach the folks who are out there, meet them where they're at, find out what their needs are, get them engaged, get them into shelter, and get them into housing options and services. Sometimes that can happen quickly, sometimes that does not happen quickly, and it takes repetition, and it takes a lot of building up of trust. But we believe that we can build that system up and deploy it across Washington County and do that. The other thing I want to highlight is communication. I said this in our meeting with Commissioner Treese, I think last Friday. I said the word of the day is communication. And that for this program, communication is going to be so vital. And we're talking about a centralized point of contact, but what does that actually mean? We're talking about communication, the macro communication about this program and what it's here to do, and also that micro communication. So if someone's looking for, how do I make a complaint? How do I find out what's happening in encampments around the county? They'll have a centralized place to go to, an email, a phone number, a website where they can go, and the collection of informations, policies, and the way to get responses will be centralized. And communication is just so key to everything we do. Also, that internal communications between our different departments, having a centralized point of contact to help us coordinate between our departments. It's a lot of work. It's a lot of work. And also that cross-jurisdictional coordination. We talk with our partners all the time across all the different cities and jurisdictions, again, helping us coordinate all that. So again, communication is maybe still the word of the day today. And we want to be able to collect data and report and tell the story of what we're accomplishing and what we're learning, and maybe some things that we didn't know too as we move forward. I'm going to kick it over to Marnie just to talk a little bit about the health and safety points of this proposal.
Thanks, Josh. So one of the contributions or role of Health and Human Services is really to make sure that we have an approach where we have a quantitative way to evaluate these encampments and to look at the health and safety of the encampments. And so what we've developed through a collaborative process, which you're going to hear a lot about today, is a SCORT assessment tool that really helps us to look at the health and safety of the encampment. It helps us to look at, how close is the encampment to groundwater, what's happening with trash, with human waste. So we're looking at environmental health and safety as well as physical health and safety of the campers, also looking at the surrounding neighborhood. And then based on that assessment and score, we have an algorithm that helps us to determine, is it better to support these campers in place, or is the health and safety risk so high that we really need to break up the camp and clean the site? And they may come back, but we may need to break it up and clean the site. And so we have a process and standard operational procedures that we work with, whether it's land use and transportation, whether it's facilities. We may hire, because we'll have contracts in place, to bring in a cleanup crew that specializes in this level of cleanup. That could be one route, or the other could be ensuring that there are sanitary conditions. So making sure that there's porta potties, that there's hand washing stations, that there's a way to collect and pick up garbage. So getting garbage collection and disposal set up. So those are the different paths that we could take. And one of the things that we need to always balance is the needs of the safety piece of this. And so one of the other partners in this that's really important to help us with that is the Sheriff's Office. And John Cook is here to talk a little bit about the role of the Sheriff's Office and the Hope Deputy.
Thanks, Marnie. Again, John Cook with the Sheriff's Office. The Sheriff's Office plays a pretty important role in the public safety portion of our community. We have had a Hope Deputy in the past, which is a houseless outreach program and education deputy. And the main goal is not just to move community members out of a camp, but to make sure that we're working in collaboration with the other county departments to provide those services and give people the education of where they can go to get that housing and get those other services. The other key piece on the collaboration is with our municipal partners. A lot of these encampments are situated in between unincorporated Washington County and municipalities. And we do not want to be giving miscommunication to folks. If we have a plan in place, we want to make sure that it's consistent with what our neighboring jurisdictions are doing. And so that collaboration between the Sheriff's Office and other local jurisdiction police departments is essential. And then the last piece is really that public safety piece. Our deputies really need to kind of know their place in these encampments to make sure that they're there to provide public safety to our staff, as well as to the community members and the folks living in those encampments. But they're comfortable taking a backseat role to other departments, but then when they need to step forward and take that lead role, they're happy to do that as well. So it's just making sure that we communicate across those boundaries and also help track a lot of that information that comes into our dispatch center to all the police departments across the county.
Thanks, John. Next slide, please. So this is the 12-month budget proposal, and we know there's a lot packed in there, but there's really 4 major buckets, and that's the outreach services, the code enforcement and public supply, contracted support, and then the contingency. And what I really want to highlight, we're showing the short term, the 12 months, and the long term. But what I really want to highlight there is the contracted services. That's a really important part of this. And it's a major bucket of funding there. And that's really to ensure that we have those contractors who are really competent, understand what we're looking for, and can be responsive to the needs of the population around sanitation, hygiene, and if camp cleanup is necessary, making sure that things are stored in accordance with the law and the requirements that are out there. Because as we know, there's a lot going on with legal requirements in our homeless population right now. So that's something that I really wanted to highlight. And I also wanted just to highlight one little thing. It's a little bit of a difference between the memo that might have went out and this number. There's just an additional $100,000 in the total, and that's really coming in on the storage. The storage costs can be quite high. And so that's just something I wanted to highlight just in case there are some inconsistencies from what you saw in the packet versus what's in the PowerPoint today. Next slide, please. So a couple unresolved questions before we get into kind of the different alternatives that we want to talk through. One is, how will the short-term program be funded? Again, staff are recommending that ARPA funds are used for eligible activity. And of course, we know that supportive housing services funds will become available over the course of the upcoming months, and kind of how we could blend those two things together, especially for areas like outreach and navigation. The other unresolved question, should the program operate countywide? Again, staff are really confident that countywide approach funded by a county-city partnership is going to offer the most consistent and efficient approach to the way that we handle this policy with our homeless encampments. And again, the other part of that is just our homeless campers and our community members can be provided with a consistent information. And the concern is that things could change based on which jurisdiction you're dealing with. If you're in this city, it could be a little bit different than that city, and that can cause some inconsistencies. Last, if approved to implement this 12-month program, again, what frequency and level of engagement does the board desire? So these are some of the questions as we go into the next slide, please. So we have up here two options, option A and option B. And within option A, it's kind of a status quo, which is minimal ARPA funds to help cover sanitation only. We kind of wait for supportive housing services to help with some of the outreach and navigation that we're talking about, but there lacks some accountability. It's kind of a continuation of what we're doing, kind of trying to put it all together with all of our various departments meeting and missing some maybe linchpin positions and processes. Option B is a mixed funding, and that's a 12-month program. Again, that's increasing the ARPA funds and blending with other funding streams to ensure that we can support the program and future work, with also an opportunity to work toward long-term planning and building that robust shared funding model and integrating resources, weaving in code enforcement and public process across different jurisdictions, and looking at reverting to no program or a more focused program. Next slide, please. So on the staff recommendation side, we're looking at option B, that mixed funding option is really the option that we're recommending here. And again, that's to increase the ARPA funds and blend with other funding streams to support program and future work. And really, we believe that this is the option that will allow us to create that consistency, build up the communication channels, build up the capacity to really implement this program in a way that's going to serve both, again, our homeless community members and the community members who have different types of concerns about the various encampments throughout the county. I'm going to turn it over to Marnie Kyle for our last couple slides here.
Thank you. So I think we can go to the last slide, which brings us really full circle to where Sia helped kick us off to really ask you now for your input and your board's discussion around these foundational policy considerations. And because it's really, you're going to hear from folks whether we recommend shelter in place or whether we recommend removal of shelter. There's pros and cons to both, but hopefully knowing that we are proposing implementing a system where we can assess the health and safety and make a recommendation based on that and move forward. So does your board support both the continued implementation of shelter in place when that's what our assessment proposes, or removal of the shelter and cleanup? And then also the last question that we'd really like your input on and consideration is, does the board support a multi-jurisdictional approach? And are you comfortable with staff moving forward with your support to begin to have some conversations with cities and other jurisdictions about this project? So with that, I will turn it back to you, Chair Harrington, and to the board.
Great. Well, thank you, staff, for putting all of this information together and having briefings or the availability of briefings to each member of the board as we have the opportunity to learn more about conditions throughout our community and possible options. I first want to ask commissioners to make sure that we are each clear on what option A and option B are about, or to see if anyone still has questions on what differentiates those two. Okay, so it looks like we are all up to speed on options A and B. So let's move forward with with group discussion on these 3 different policy considerations. First, board members, are you comfortable with the continued implementation of the shelter-in-place philosophy? I know I am. See Commissioner Fye, Therese, or thumbs up. Commissioner Rogers, questions or comments?
Well, had this briefing yesterday, we chatted, and my answer was no if we can't get number 3. Number 3 is critical to me. Does the board support a multi-jurisdictional approach? Absolutely.
Yeah, I agree with you on that. It makes no sense to me to just allow people to shelter in place unless we have a program to help people. I don't know. I'm not trying to put words in your mouth, but
No, that's exactly the point.
yeah, we're not just going to let you shelter in place and do nothing.
Correct.
Okay. Go ahead, Commissioner Therese.
I agree with that. We have to have number 3, but I also think it's really important that we have a strong collaboration in the multi-jurisdictional approach, because we need to have the same approach throughout the county. Because, you know, if I've learned anything through the point in time discussions, all of that is the fluidity of this situation, and the fact that it's incumbent upon us to create some predictability in terms of services for people who are in that situation.
Yep.
They don't know where city boundaries start and stop, and it makes sense that we all collaborate to make sure that we are on the same page. So the services plus the collaboration.
Yep.
I didn't finish on point number 2.
I'm sorry.
No, that's all right. Pam, I appreciate your comments because I agree with them. On number 2, I said that's unfortunate for the sheriff department. It's unfortunate for everybody involved, but absolutely have to be able to move if there's health issues, and that's why it's so important for the collaboration, as Commissioner Therese would say in item 3, because people don't care where the lines are. So do I support 1? Only if 3 is in effect. 2, absolutely have to have that ability. And then we go to 3, which is the trump card. We've got to be able to go and say, you need not to run across the borders and just say, well, we'll go to the unincorporated Washington County areas. We need to be able to have a multi-jurisdictional approach. So that's all my comments.
Yeah, I agree with you. I really appreciate the work that has gone into putting these programs together, not only from our Washington County lead team members who are here today and others in their departments that they work with, but I know this collaborative work has already been happening across Washington County and the various cities, because that is not only what the spirit is here in Washington County. We collaborate, it's just the way we roll, but also because that is what our community needs and what our community members need. So I think it's just an incredible opportunity for us to continue to do this work together as an agency, but also meeting the needs of our community. I think the real rub for me isn't, should we have this short-term program? No, absolutely we should. And we do need to make sure there are certain sideboards, right? As we've been talking about here. But how are we going to proceed with commitments to funding? Because our staff knows that at the end of the day, costs need to be covered. So I know they heard from me that, and as I shared with you previously, I believe in work sessions, I did have the opportunity to check in with a few mayors on this. We're each getting different levels of support from the American Rescue Plan Act, or ARPA, as we're referring to it. I think homeless services, affordable housing, support services are part of Washington County's portfolio. So I would like us to ask our city partners if they could join us in funding this 12-month program. But at this juncture, with meeting the needs of our community as we continue to cope with this virus in our community, and we're going to need to be nimble for a good another year. I want to make sure that our staff knows we've got costs covered, that we'll figure out how to use and maximize all the ARPA dollars and any other partner contributions to get this 12-month, $1.9+ million program funded. So we just have to make sure it happens for this short-term time period. And I have absolute trust and faith in them to treat people humanely, to be respectful, to continue their extraordinary patient work in working not only with our houseless community members, but also with our housed community members, whether they be owners or renters, to help ensure that people's concerns are aired, that we hear them, and that they can count on what we are doing, what we're not able to do, and moving forward in working on their behalf. So, commissioners, other thoughts? Commissioner Fye, go ahead. And then Commissioner Willie.
I gave you a thumbs up when you were asking the question number 1 around if we are supporting the shelter in place. I have a comment and some clarifications, and then and my comment is for number 2. I would like us to create some parameters around what are those public health and public safety concerns, so that we can educate our residents, and that we're not further perpetuating profiling of certain groups, because what might be a safety concern to somebody might just be somebody just walking by, or somebody just sitting and taking a break. So I like for us to put that together and disseminate that information for our residents. And then I agree with Commissioner Rogers. I think that's a really good point around number 3. I do support, and I do think cities should contribute. I like to ask, I don't know if it's Marnie or somebody, just to clarify the special districts contribution piece. I don't, my district, Cooper Mountain, and some definitely Aloha and a little bit of Reedville might actually fall into the unincorporated areas. So I want to understand more about that special district contribution to the funding strategy piece further. And I really want to say, Under Sheriff Cook, thank you for saying, my concern when I was getting this briefing was, we're not telling people that don't have homes to go home, or, so I appreciate what you said. And if we really just keep that focus, that we're in this to help people and to facilitate in a more equitable way of housing people, I'm confident this will work, and we can eventually find the fundings to whatever funding options we go. And I think the staff suggestion to go with option B makes sense, and I do support that.
So Commissioner Fye, in response to your first question about how we make decisions about whether to shelter in place or to remove the camp so that we can do cleanup, that to me, that's sort of the beauty of this program, because I feel like in the past a little bit it was really dependent on whether the neighbors really knew how to call the right people and make enough noise to where we finally had to go in and do something. And now we have an assessment tool that's got some evidence behind it and is a weighted tool that really is looking at the health and safety, looking at the amount of garbage, looking at human waste, looking at the proximity to streams and rivers and groundwater and drinking water, looking at, you know, what are the alternatives if the camp is cooperative and is willing to help pick up the trash and keep, you know, if we give them the resources. And then the sheriff's office helps us with the public safety side. Is there criminal activity? Is it just one person that if we remove that one person that it's safe? Can we offer things like harm reduction with syringe exchange? Josh's team coming in there with navigation and helping people to access housing services so that they can find better situations when that works for them. So that's to me the equity piece of this model, is that we do have sound assessment tool to make these kinds of decisions. Whereas before, I don't think that we really had that. We didn't have a really strong quantitative way of assessing whether or not to support the camp or to clean the camp. And so that's what I'm pretty excited about. And I'm not going to try to answer the question about special districts. I don't believe that Aloha, Sia, I think, is the best person to answer that question. I was going to say, I'm going to turn that one over to Sia.
Thanks, Marnie. Commissioner Fye, I appreciate your question about that. The relationship, the collaboration with cities is going to be probably in the forefront because they have such a strong role within their jurisdictions on code enforcement and public safety. Where special districts step in, Clean Water Services and THPRD in particular have been strong partners on this. Encampments do end up on their properties, but they also help with kind of the clean water, clean land. So they will play a role and have actually played a role in the collaborative work we've done so far. But cities are the first step for us.
Thank you. Sia, I asked that because I don't, we don't want to, I would hate to see some of my utilities funding increase because of this, so as long as there's no surprises or residents aren't gonna see some increase because we have to do this. So that's what I was asking. Thank you.
Commissioners, other thoughts or questions? Because what I'm hearing so far is option B and yes in terms of support. Go ahead, Commissioner Willie.
Yeah, I'm looking at, I guess I'm thinking of this in kind of two steps, and that's what this option B actually discusses. The first one, of course, is the 12-month program where we're going to spend a couple of $1 million, and it looks like I'm looking at the cost schedule that we got on our sheet and the allocation. Most of it or a lot of it's going to be the ARPA funding is going to provide the initial funding for this, it looks like, which I'm fine with that. But in the long-term planning, it says the third bullet point is revert to no program or a more focused program. And again, to me, that I'd really like that to not be an option. I don't think it's going to be an option. I mean, we're not going to, 12 months from now, we're not going to have significantly reduced homelessness or these homeless camps. This is a long-term play. And so I'm hoping that in the 12 months, we can develop a program where we have these much more contained, that are people that are living all over in unincorporated or in cities don't have to be concerned that if they're living out in a little bit more of a remote area, that all of a sudden they're going to see blue tents pop up all around them. So again, a 12-month snapshot to get us into a program that is much more defined, I guess. And so that's what I would hope for would be the outcome of this. And yeah, I'm completely supportive. I definitely agree it has to be multi-jurisdictional. And the reason why, again, from my standpoint, is that we can't have a program or a platform or a policy for unincorporated and then the cities not be consistent with that. Then we're going to have homeless camps moving from A to B depending on where the least restrictions are. And so, yeah, and I think the cities should be able to comprehend that. Whether or not they want to kick in any money, well, okay, I think they need to step up to the plate just like we're going to, but that'll be a discussion we can have later. But for right now, I'm supportive of all the things that we just said. Just want us to make sure that we have a long-term plan of action that's going to work as well. So, thoughts?
Thank you, Commissioner Willie. I appreciate, as one of your colleagues, hearing that. I also appreciate our staff being really super intellectually honest that our various funding streams do have constraints. So they're just leaving the various possibilities open in 12 months' time, letting us know that there are no foregone conclusions, but they will be learning and doing this work at the same time. But before that 12 months is over, they'll be reporting back to us on what we've learned, what various options are, what they might do differently, if anything, and bring us the best recommendations of the day then. So I know that we're getting all kinds of viewpoints shared with us from residents, business owners, colleagues at the elected levels outside of Washington County, even on what we should and shouldn't do. So I really appreciate that our staff is leaving all those future doors available to us. But you are spot on correct that, you know, we may have a future where we continue to have needs in our community, and we need to be honest about that too. Yes, thank you. Other commissioner thoughts? It looks like, if I could summarize, go ahead, Commissioner Treese.
I gave my thoughts about the priorities, but I didn't say thank you to the staff for all the work that was done and for the briefing ahead of time. You guys did a great job, and I really do appreciate how, as the chair said, your moral compass is really right on, and thank you for that.
So I believe you've gotten some pretty supportive and clear direction here, don't you? And I'm looking at all 4 team members, and they all are on the same page, plus Miss Angie. So please, thank you very much for the work that you've put into examining this difficult community need and putting together various options and proposals, and for helping us consider that and close on it today. Great.
Board, thank you.
And I would just like to note that the work that I spoke to earlier on the Metro Supportive Housing Services budget note is related to this tough topic. So while the Metro Council is having their work session, at the same time as we're having this conversation, I will do my part to carry the results of this discussion forward. So thank you, colleagues. I really appreciate it. Okay, so it's 3:34 and we have one more topic of our very long, incredible Turbo Tuesday. And it is House Bill 2001, Middle Housing Economic Analysis and Market Study. It was really an incredible final report. And we also have the project acknowledgement. So without further ado, I would like to turn the mic over to our incredible Stephen Roberts with his team of Teresa Cherniak and Kim Armstrong. Take it away, team.
Great, thank you, Madam Chair, and we appreciate you working us in this afternoon. I know it's been a very busy day We'll be back on your consent agenda next week for a formal acknowledgement of the final report, and we just want to walk you through it so you know what's in it, be able to answer any questions that you may have, and let you know what we're going to be up to going forward on this project. And with that, I will turn it over to Teresa, and I think we have a couple of consultant folks online with us as well, Tyler Bump and Becky Hewitt.
Great, thank you, Stephen. Oh, yes, Chair Harrington.
I just want to make sure that we're helping Clerk Moss identify folks who may be under attendees who need to be advanced as panelists.
Yes, so thank you, Madam Chair. So Stephen or Kim, is PMAR staff, is that Tyler?
No, that's Portland Metropolitan Area of Realtors staff.
Yeah.
Okay.
And Tyler may not be with us today. Becky will be doing the bulk of that. So, so yeah, I think he's probably not here.
Okay.
Great.
Sorry
Thank
to
you.
delay us. I just wanted to make sure.
No problem. Good afternoon, Chair Harrington and Commissioners. Teresa Cherniak, Principal Planner with Community Planning. Kim Armstrong will lead off the presentation, and then Becky Hewitt from Eco Northwest will talk about the new information in the findings and recommendations report, and then I'll do the wrap up. So we'll go ahead with Kim.
So if you can go ahead and go to the next slide, and you can go to the next slide after that too. These are the questions that we've put forth for your consideration. We're going to be going at a really high level over some regulatory options, and we'd like to get your input and on those things and any additional data that you'd like us to prioritize for House Bill 2001 implementation. So go ahead and go to the next slide and probably the one after that. Yeah, thank you. So I'm just going to give you a quick refresher on House Bill 2001. As you all know, because I have told you several times before, House Bill 2001 does require that large cities and counties, including Washington County, allow duplexes on each lot or parcel within our urban growth boundary where a detached single-family dwelling is allowed, and that we allow all other middle housing types, which include triplex, quadplexes, townhomes, and cottage clusters in areas of the UGB that we would allow detached single-family dwellings. This does exclude future development land, and we are permitted to regulate middle housing to comply with statewide planning goal protections like significant natural resource protections. Go ahead and go to the next slide. We can, of course, continue to allow detached single-family dwellings. We can regulate siting and design of middle housing within guidelines established by the rules. We can allow middle housing in additional locations beyond where we are required to allow it by House Bill 2001. We must not, however, discourage the development of middle housing through unreasonable cost or delay. Next slide, please. In general, we have to allow a duplex on any lot that allows a detached single-family dwelling, and for other middle housing types, we may choose to allow to require minimum lot sizes. If we choose to require minimum lot sizes, we must allow triplexes on lots 5,000 square feet or more, fourplexes on lots 7,000 square feet or more, and cottage clusters on lots 7,000 square feet or more. Townhomes are regulated slightly differently, but it works out to 20 to 25 units an acre. And the minimum compliance standards do say that we may only require one off-street parking space per unit for all middle housing types. Next slide, please. So as you can see in the timeline that is revised from the last one that you saw, we are just wrapping up this economic analysis and market feasibility study, which ECO will talk to you about. We're going to take that information and use it to develop our code concepts and talk to you more as we need board guidance and policy decisions so that we can get our ordinances filed in time to meet our deadline. So you can see that there's orange circles for board briefings. That's when we're going to come back and talk to you about things. So if you can go to the next slide, I think Becky is ready to go.
Hi, board. I'm Becky Hewitt with Echo Northwest. Nice to see you again. And I appreciate you guys making time for this and what I know has been an epically long day for you. In the interest of getting you out of here a little bit sooner, it's just me, not Tyler, so we can kind of keep things moving. If you can go to the next slide, please. I'm going to give a real on some of what we talked about last time and then go on to some of the newer pieces. So we looked at what makes middle housing more or less economically feasible to develop, how that might vary in different parts of Washington County's urban unincorporated area, and how the county's policy choices could affect middle housing feasibility. Next slide, please. So last time we brought you an initial report. We summarized background information, provided some initial findings on economic feasibility, and gave some initial potential strategies to consider. We've updated that report based on feedback we got from this body, as well as the Planning Commission, and also expanded the assessment of some of the regulatory options and incentives and other strategies that you might consider in implementing House Bill 2001. There's a lot more detail in that final report than we're going to cover today. And our intention with that is to essentially offer some information and trade-offs that you and staff can refer back to as you work through the process of developing the regulations to implement House Bill 2001 and consider the choices in more depth. So this is kind of an intro to some of the policy choices that will come before you and that staff will be working through with you over the coming months. Next slide, please. So overall, just as a reminder, our prior analysis found that middle housing is likely to be feasible to develop on a small fraction of parcels throughout the urban unincorporated area, generally on pretty large lots, not the average home in a developed subdivision. And that ownership housing is more likely to be built than rental housing for middle housing. And particularly townhouses are one of the more likely forms of middle housing that could get developed. Next slide, please. So our analysis and our presentation today are not going to address anywhere near all of the changes that you are going to need to make and need to consider as part of implementing House Bill 2001. There are a lot of important details that your staff is going to have to work through, but there are some pretty limited options for many of those changes that you're going to have to make. So our analysis focused in on a couple of strategies and regulatory options that we identified in discussions with staff that might particularly affect middle housing feasibility. So I'm going to offer a couple of highlights from our assessment. And again, it's just a preview of some things that staff is going to come back to you with in future briefings. Next slide, please. So the topics that we're going to, that we covered in the report and that we're going to touch on today are mostly things that either we knew early on were likely to affect feasibility and we flagged them kind of from the beginning. Some things that we decided to look into a little more closely as we were reviewing the initial feasibility results and kind of seeing what stood out to us from that. And some topics that came up from the past board discussion and past planning commission discussions. So that's how we got to this list of things that we evaluated. Next slide, please. So I'm going to keep this one and most of the others pretty brief. I'm happy to field questions if you guys still have enough intellectual curiosity left to muster some questions after a very long day. And again, this is intended just to kind of whet your appetite for some of the additional discussions that you'll have with staff. So for street frontage requirements, this is a question of whether you're going to require new middle housing to make improvements like adding a sidewalk or curb and gutter to the street in front of the property at time of development. Essentially, the rules say you have to treat duplexes the same as single family. You mostly do that now. You will have to make at least some small changes to the way you do the requirements, but you could consider making bigger changes to the current system, either requiring new single family and duplexes to make improvements. You'd have to think about proportionality and some other things, or exempting all middle housing from making those improvements. And you'd have to think about what the implications are for connectivity and safety. And the costs are enough to affect feasibility, but the safety and connectivity considerations are real as well. So those are just some of the things that you'll have to consider as you work through those decisions. And again, the kind of default of making very little change is, in this case, it should be acceptable under the rules. Next slide, please. So for townhouses, I noted that townhouses look like they're going to be probably the most financially feasible form of middle housing, particularly on larger lots, and that they might be more financially feasible than single family housing, but there's still really strong demand for detached housing. And so as a result, on large lots, although you could potentially see some of those very large lots develop entirely with townhomes, we don't think that's particularly likely as an outcome. But we did look at some options that you could consider if there are concerns about how much townhome development is possible on those larger lots. Your options are kind of limited for regulating townhomes, but as I said, if that comes up as an issue, there are some options that you could consider that might help kind of balance things out a little bit. Next slide, please. So for cottage clusters, you will have some choices to make about whether to regulate the size and height of the cottages. If you allow larger units, they are more likely to be financially feasible, but they may not look the way that people would expect a cottage to look. And particularly given the recent passage of Senate Bill 458, which is going to require jurisdictions to allow an expedited land division process for middle housing, a cottage cluster development could be then divided in a way that it might end up looking kind of like a small lot subdivision. And so it's just something to think about, that you want to think about what kind of requirements you want to apply in terms of unit size, how they're arranged on the site, how they relate to any sort of common open space and things like that. And kind of work within the options that are available under state rules. But that is an important one. I think the choices you make there you'll potentially see a difference in what kind of development results. Next slide, please. So we talked briefly about design requirements last time that I had the pleasure of joining you all. And so I want to emphasize, we're talking about whether the county should apply some fairly basic, clear and objective standards that would be similar to the ones that you currently apply to detached housing, and whether you should apply something like that to middle housing. So as staff brings some options to you in the coming months, you'll need to think about kind of the benefits of maybe some greater community acceptance, and the trade-offs of potentially a modest increase in cost and permitting time, not to the point where it would be considered unreasonable cost or delay, but there can be some modest increase in cost and time. And you have some options. The model code lays out some options. You can create your own standards. You could apply something similar to what you currently have for detached with a few tweaks. And those will be some of the options that staff will be considering and developing over the coming months. Next slide, please. Finally, so as kind of the last of regulatory strategies that you might consider, we looked at affordable housing incentives. So jurisdictions can't require that middle housing be affordable at any particular level. That's prohibited under state law. But incentives for affordability are allowed and encouraged. You have an existing discretionary density bonus that applies to affordable housing. Because it's discretionary, that makes it a little more challenging, and for a small project that might be kind of problematic, but it is there and it could be updated and modified potentially. You also have parking reduction and some property tax exemptions that are available for regulated affordable housing. offering additional incentives is probably not going to be enough that developers choose, that a market rate developer would choose to include some regulated affordable units, but it would help your affordable housing developers and nonprofit developers stretch the resources that are available to them and potentially get more units within the same amount of land cost and roughly the same amount of permitting cost and everything else. You might at least consider a couple of changes to your existing incentive programs to make them work better for middle housing. And staff may bring you back options as part of House Bill 2001 implementation or closely following. And next slide. So we want to note there is more that the county can do in terms of supporting affordability, housing stability, and equity beyond land use regulations. We talked about a few of the things the state requires jurisdictions to consider, tax exemptions and TDT waivers, and you might want to consider some additional measures through a more comprehensive process, which I think Teresa is going to talk a little bit about how staff is thinking about that moving forward.
Great, thank you, Becky. So we want to be really clear, and I know the board knows as well, that housing affordability and equity are really big topics, and the work on HB 2001 implementation is a step in the right direction, but it's really only a piece of the overall housing puzzle. And there are a number of different county departments that are working on housing and providing housing affordable to community members besides LUT. So the Office of Community Development, the Department of Housing Services, Health and Human Services do a lot of work in the housing realm. And we are aware of that, and we work together on these various housing programs. And so it's really a collaborative effort. Part of what HB 2001 is about can be to increase housing affordability, but it's, again, only a part of that whole bigger picture. If we can go to the next slide. So the more we talk with the Department of Land Conservation and Development and other jurisdictions doing HB 2001 implementation work, and as we review our current requirements and the requirements of the bill and the rules, we continue to be struck with how complicated the topic is. While the rules are relatively prescriptive, they will still be complicated to implement through our own regulations. So to meet the timeline of June 2022, which is just a year away, to have the rules adopted or our regulations adopted, we are going to be recommending an overall simple approach. So we'll come back to the board with more detail about this in August. But overall, we're going to be recommending developing regulations based on the minimum compliance approach, which is basically what we need to do to meet the regulations, and probably borrowing some text and some graphics from the model code. We will present options in the few places where they do exist for the board to consider, including some of the strategies that have been laid out in this presentation. And what we want to do is provide you more information about those strategies in the context of the overall program that we're hoping to present. And in some areas, there are probably options to mitigate some of the potential community impacts, including some, as Becky mentioned, some limited design standards, some of the potential limits to the size of the cottage cluster units, and possibly some limits on townhouses on larger lots. And we'd recommend looking at those as we progress if the issues are raised by the board or others during the code development. And then finally, we think probably we just want to let the board know up front, there will probably be some things that we suggest we defer until we move forward with meeting the minimum requirements. And part of that is just to make sure that we do what we need to do, what we absolutely have to do by June 2022. Some of the things, particularly on incentives, and some of the particularly affordability incentives could be difficult and just complicated to develop, and could take a lot of time that we may need to get the basics in place. Next slide, please. So next steps on this report itself, we are asking next week for board acknowledgement of the study that's on the consent agenda. It's a resolution in order that's required by the DLCD grant. And then more generally on HB 2001 implementation, we are planning an online open house and a virtual town hall. So right now we do have a website, and that's providing a lot of information to people, educational materials. We'll do an online open house and a virtual town hall to get more word out to community members. We'll start a series of briefings with the Planning Commission on different topics to help us as we sort through some of the code topics, and then also to help them get more educated before we start the hearing process. And then our plan is every 2 months to come back to the board with a work session. And so the next one will be August 17th, and we'll start framing up some of those policy questions for the board so that you can help us as we move this forward and tackle some of those policy questions. And then actually September to December, there'll be more outreach. We're in the process of putting together a grant, another grant with DLCD to do outreach on the work, the HB 2001 code development work. And part of that is to do culturally sensitive outreach. We are working with the OEICE, the Office of Community. I always get it wrong. So OEICE, our office, and we'll be
Equity, inclusion, and community engagement.
Thank you very much. I always want to say diversity, and I know there's not a D in there, and that always. But the idea is to have robust public engagement and to have it be as equitable and diverse as possible. Next slide, please. So board input. At this point, we've talked a lot, and we'd like to open the floor for board questions on the study and the findings of the study, particularly the regulatory options that we talked about. And just a reminder, we will be bringing a lot of that back in a lot more detail. So we're happy to field questions now, and maybe we'll need to answer some of that in a later meeting. Are there other things at this point that you think you'd like us to consider as we start doing the policy work? Any additional research or data collection that you'd like us to do? And any other comments you have from what you've heard in this presentation? So at that point, I will stop and open it up.
Hey, so commissioners, I am hoping that we can close on this particular topic by 4:20 so that I can catch all of you before 4:30 and Commissioner Treese's departure time with regard to the Metro Supportive Housing Services topic. So there's
there's a couple, we didn't get to leadership updates, so there's a couple things I want to brief the board on.
Yes, okay, thank you. And keep me honest, Commissioner Treese, her policy assistant will just have to bring her up to speed after the fact. There's 5 of us. So which of you 4 would like to speak first? 1, 2, 3, go. Don't be shy. Don't make me do this, people. Go ahead, Commissioner Willie. Thank you.
Well, my comments are going to be relatively short. I read the executive summary of the 64-page report, and I think, quite frankly, the thing that struck me most was the amount of work and involvement and time we're putting into this for less than 3% housing growth, I guess. I don't know what the correct term is, but it's a pretty small number. And we're spending a considerable amount of time and resources on that. Having said that, I get the concept and certainly want to provide opportunity. But to me, it's a pretty small results at the end of the day. Other than that, we do what we have to do. So I certainly am not going to weigh in on the specifics, other measures we should consider, additional research and data collection. I just read the report and know that Stephen and his department will certainly do what we have to do. So that's my only comments.
Thank you, Commissioner Willie. Any other commissioner thoughts? Or I'm happy to go first. I got one invitation for me to go first. So I'm going to take silence as a further invitation. So thank you, Commissioner Willie, for sharing that observation. You know, our staff is following up on direction, specific requirements that the state legislature has put on us to follow through. And we have to make sure that we follow through on our part. I did appreciate that we had the work session on April 13th, because this is a big topic and there's a lot of subsequent work. I think what I'm about to do is share a set of opinions with you, and my brain at this point in time is not, I cannot guarantee you that there are what I'm about to say excludes conflicting information. Okay, so you may have to follow up with me and hold me intellectually honest to come back to that post this meeting, and I'll share that with my colleagues in the future. I'm committed to that. So yes, a lot of work for small gains, but small gains that we need to allow nonetheless. I appreciate all the work that we are doing with support from our regional government to increase the supply of stable housing, affordable housing, true affordable housing, not just affordable for purchase. So I want to make sure that but most of that is primarily, that we do, is primarily in the rental aspect versus home ownership. And I have to say, as a person, my first home as a 20-something was a garden style condo, AKA a new apartment that was condoized, right? And because of that, I started building my personal financial wealth. And I was struck by a comment that I received from a lobbyist for the retailer, realtors, asking me about my new neighborhood, my second freestanding home that I lived in here in Oregon, in Washington County, how in the world I could stand living in a house that was 12 feet from my neighbor's house because we had 6-foot lot lines. And it never dawned on me that I would buy a house I didn't like. So I let her know that, well, you know, thank you very much, but I think all of us in our new 22 home development chose to purchase. Nobody required us to. So that taught me a lesson that I continue to carry forward today, that different strokes for different folks, right? different people like different things, and that each housing solution satisfies different needs for different people at different stages of their lives. And now I have my third freestanding home here in Washington County, which is zoned as a cottage cluster, though it's one of those 3-story pictures that is in our presentation today. And in my neighborhood, which is the 45-degree central neighborhood in the city of Beaverton, there are different sizes. And the common areas, much like any other HOA in our community, are really important, certainly during COVID and dog walking. So I want to make sure as we move forward that we maximize the opportunity available through maximizing clarity, but minimizing costs. We don't have any financial money incentives to provide. One incentive I don't want to put on the table is parking reduction. We already know through House Bill 2001 that we can't go any lower than that one off-street parking. I live in a neighborhood that some of the homes have a 1-stall garage and only a 1-car stall garage. And I'm okay with that. Remember, I chose to move there. So I understand what the ramifications are for some of these design choices, but good design matters. So I want us to err on the side of providing for as much ownership opportunity as we move forward. I am a little bit concerned about the recommended approach in doing minimal and having mitigation impacts if there's community concern. Come on, the state legislature has already set us up for there to be concerns. We just have to manage through it. We have an undersupply of available homes of different shapes and sizes. So I want to make sure we maximize that home ownership opportunity. As you move forward with community engagement, I want to make sure that we've done our part as an agency to reach into various organizations that often weigh in on things like this, particularly Habitat for Humanity, which often provides for first-time home buyer support, and various CBO organizations that I know all of different departments are engaged with, plus the Home Builders Association and the Portland Metro Area Realtors. Thank you, Kim. I know you're familiar with all of those, and I can trust the full team in making sure that happens. As we move forward, let me know if I need to be present. So to your questions, do I have questions on the regulatory options? I don't think I have any questions. I do have opinions, as I have certainly shared. Are there other measures that I'd like you to consider? No, I think I've spoken about ones I want to have come off of the table. And on research and data collection, no, I think we have plenty. I know I've printed off parts of the document, so I know what I kind of know what we're getting into. But at the bottom line, I know how important home ownership is. I know how important stable housing is, and I know my colleagues do too. Gosh, I respect them. How important stable housing is, but also having home ownership opportunities. So those are my thoughts of this afternoon. Hopefully there aren't any conflicting messages there, but I'll leave that to staff to analyze for me and come back and see what my colleagues who haven't had opportunity yet to speak have to contribute. Commissioner Rogers.
Yeah, real quick comment and then one big question, and that is that I wasn't fond of this. I still am not fond of it because of the issues of parking that you brought up. Also that the whole infrastructure issues were not well thought out. But that was what we were dealt with in terms of the legislative policy. So forgetting all that and getting to the pragmatic, what do you do with it? My big concern is really the coordination with other jurisdictions in terms of what they're doing. My prediction, and I can make predictions 40, 50 years out, and not only will I not be serving here, but I probably won't be anywhere on this earth, is that most of our areas and unincorporated will be coming into cities. And with that advent happening, we shouldn't place any impediments to that occurring, meaning we shouldn't set up our particular map of the areas as we see them different than they do. What does that mean? I don't know. I mean, this is such a huge policy that I don't think there's any data that we need. I don't think there's anything else we can do other than to implement language. But I still think that we, and I'm sure you, Stephen, you probably have done it. You've talked with cities and particularly those areas where there are budding current cities. What do they see as a vision for areas that they might incorporate in the future, so that we don't sit there and put some development. They said, that's horrible. I'll never, ever want to annex that area because of the configuration of the roads, configuration of the housing, what you did in that area. And so we have islands, you know, that never get considered. So beyond that, carry forward. You got the policy. We got the policy. It is what it is. I don't want to provide any other incentives to do anything. I think it's fraught with enough difficulties without doing that. So that's my input.
I might just say that we have been meeting with, so we have a planning directors monthly meeting, and the HB 2001 implementation is a regular agenda topic. So we did just update what all the different jurisdictions are doing this past month. Metro had a coordination meeting yesterday, a couple of them. DLCD does a monthly coordination meeting, and then we actually monthly meet with Beaverton and Hillsborough staff. So we're aware of what each other are doing, and we're sharing ideas and information. And so I think we're pretty well on track with what the other jurisdictions are doing. When I mentioned minimum compliance, that wasn't meant to imply that they're minimal things that we have to do. Minimum compliance is actually probably going to be quite a bit. That it's what we need to do to meet the requirements of the bill. And most other jurisdictions are approaching it in the same kind of way. Beaverton is doing it a little differently. They had started some housing. They have a housing options project, and they had started work before even House Bill 2001. So they have 3 different possible approaches that they're exploring, and we're on their technical advisory committee, and we're meeting regularly with them. So we're aware of what they're doing. I think what we're likely to do will mesh with what they're doing, but it'll be a little bit different because they just started from a different place.
Teresa, just one follow-up point. I know you guys talk to each other. The coordination's always been wonderful, and you kind of have an idea. But just for my humor, and you don't need to humor anybody else, just me right this second. And another day, if you asked them one basic question, that was, if these unincorporated areas came into your city tomorrow, all of where you aspire to go, would our plan in any way be different than what you would do? And so that's a real easy one. And so you kind of tease out with them what they're thinking. So they talk to us and they say, oh yeah, here's what we're doing, here's what you're doing, that's great. But that simple question of saying, if these were your areas tomorrow, would in any way what we're doing impede you from accepting these areas into your city? Are there any impediments that you see? Hopefully the answer would be no, because they would do the same doggone thing, but it's just curiosity. I'll ask some mayors too. So Anyway, thank you.
Thanks.
Commissioner Fye or Trees, going once, going twice, 3 times for comments, quick as you can. Commissioner Fye?
I don't have any comment. Great job, staff, and I think I'm relying on the staff to bring us the right track on this.
Okie doke. Commissioner Trees?
Thank you, Chair. I just want to echo the thoughts of Commissioner Fye. I think you guys are doing great work. It was a, there's the way that you have honed in on how this plays out in Washington County is important, and thank you for your work there. And I'm supportive.
Okay. Staff, do you need me to summarize or you're pretty clear?
I think we're good.
I think we got what we need, so thank you so much.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Becky, for joining the team in the meeting today.
Thank you for having me.
Okay, thanks, team. We're going to move on. We have Metro Supportive Housing Services and then Leadership Communication. So I'm not trying to be rude, but rather I want to make sure that I've got the benefit of Commissioner Treese while here. So the latest and greatest, the Metro work session is continuing. They seem to be bound and determined to proceed with a budget note process, which quite frankly concerns me because as multiple Metro counselors have had the opportunity to hear from me, this sets a precedent for them where in addition to just watching their agendas and the work that they do through MPAC and JPAC, we have to watch what they're doing with their budget because they would be moving forward with potential policy in their budget process, which is not good. I've been very straightforward with them that they have the opportunity outside of budgets to create resolutions at any time, and they should be getting their information needs to their COO through that work and making sure that their proposals don't have impact on us. I think that what I'm seeing as potential engagement does leave the door open to try to minimize impact on us, though it continues to talk about collaborating. I think the heart of what they're doing in this bullet list of direction to the COO is good for them. I think that it's just very difficult to accept how they've rushed through something that is so reliant upon a partnership that we're just strengthening here. This whole supportive housing services program is a unique program. We're not just partner local jurisdictions. We're actually partners in success on this, and I'm very concerned about that. So what does this mean in 1 minute or less, Catherine? What I would like to do is ensure that I always have the opportunity to speak as one member of the Washington County Board of Commissioners. Okay, that's not a problem. You also know that I am not going to get in front of my skis, so to speak, ahead of you. I can't do that. I'm really trying to look out for our success in our implementation of the supportive housing services program. And so there is an opportunity for us to send a letter to communicate concerns from all of us as the Washington County Board of Commissioners and as 5 of 7 members of the Washington County Housing Authority Board of Directors. And then they usually have 2 minutes for public hearings or public comment, and it could be shortened to just 1 minute. So I'm going to be prepared to deliver rapid fire talking points as well. So what would you like me to do?
I am comfortable with you moving forward. I will sign on individually based on what you've said about that. My concern is that we collectively make decisions, and I agree that I don't want us or any of us to have to be looking at under the sheets to find the policy pieces. That concerns me too. So, but on this particular issue, I'm uncomfortable with Metro operating unilaterally without the counties as a whole, or all 3 counties.
No, I did just have to remind myself that we could have a very short special meeting sometime Thursday morning. Their meeting starts at 2 in the afternoon on Thursday. So somewhere between 9 and 2, we could have a very short meeting. And between now and then, I can work with Elizabeth, who's listening in on their meeting, and the latest and greatest, get a draft letter out to you, and we could just gavel in, get your opinion, and gavel out, and she can certainly take any wordsmithing comments that you have in advance of that as well.
I like that approach, Chair Harrington, because I don't know if we're referring to the old language of the budget notes or this new one. I think they did a sort of like 180-degree turnaround with the new language for the budget note. And I'm not sure, like as a new person, I'm not sure I disagree what's in the budget notes, but I like to see what it's in our letters and where we're going with that. I think that the only piece I saw was, I mean, I had questions, but besides that, there was only one part where it says coordinating with the county. So I want to understand what's in our letter and what we're trying to say so I can sign on.
So I'm on my 5th budget note to review from them, the 3rd major update of their budget note in less than 7 days. So I'm kind of tired of being on this rapid fire journey.
Could I ask a question here quickly? So there's 2 issues. There's what the budget note does, but there's also the concept of the process of a budget note. Is that correct?
Yes, and inside the, yes, you're right about that. But inside the content of the budget note, I'm very concerned that our team is, and frankly, in talking to the Tri-County chairs last night about this, all 3 of our teams are stretched to meet the ambitious yet realistic goals that we set for ourselves in each of our local implementation plans, especially in year 1 and into year 2. And it's one thing for Metro councilors to direct their COO to get them information. It's another thing entirely that those same teams might be asked to do additional information work, right? Some of this work and information they're looking for is already work that our teams are doing. So I'm on the lookout for that. That's embedded in what these budget notes have been. they've worked very hard to reduce that level of impingement on local jurisdictions. But you're right that there are those two issues. There's actually what the contents are and making sure it's in line with what the voters approved and doesn't have a fiscal or workload impact on us. And then secondly, making sure they know the harm of using this this technique in such a way that it sets a precedent that every May and June we have to, in addition to our own budget work, have to be watching them like a hawk, which says a lot for me, because I go from being someone who served on the council and worked really hard to make sure we were open and transparent, to joining the rest of the gang feeling like, what's Metro trying to inflict on us now? Which is a 180. Thank you, Commissioner Treese. So it would be a really brief meeting on Thursday.
I think that's a good idea.
Rogers and Commissioner Willie, I know that I haven't looked at my calendar to see what I'm turning up on my head as well. It looks like I have a 9 to 10 engagement with an outside firm, but it looks like somewhere between 10 and 12 I could accommodate. How about the rest of you? Commissioner Rogers, I'm concerned for you as well as Commissioner Willie in your outside work.
Well, thank you. I have a series of blood draws and medical meetings that morning. So unfortunately, I'm not available on Thursday, but my comment is, it would be brief. That is that I think I understand where you're going, but I haven't seen the detail. And if Commissioner Fye was saying that she'd like to see the information before she signs on the line, I guess I'm the same way. I trust you in terms of you've grown, and I wouldn't say it's a 180 degree. I'd say you've grown in terms of being skeptical of your formal organization, just like you ought to be skeptical of everything. I mean, that's healthy skepticism. Not that they're wrong; they're a good organization. It's just they do things that maybe conflict with what our interests are. So, what you were explaining, I would be on board of taking some position. I just think that we need to see what that is and look like. But Thursday morning doesn't work. I mean, if it's very brief, 5 minutes, I'll try to find some time I can sneak away with a cell phone. I will not physically be in my office though. So that's my problem.
Yeah, so we would be asking you to participate by phone, but to make sure that you have access to your email tomorrow so that I can get you whatever's publicly available from them, which could, I mean, I'm the one that made sure they knew that one of their pieces of information wasn't publicly available last week, even though anyway, and that you've got a draft letter in your hands. Yeah, you deserve that. But these various updates have, until their work session today, discussion, have not been in the public eye. Commissioner Willie, what are your thoughts?
Well, I think that's probably what concerns me most is if we communicate that we are a transparent organization, not we, but any governmental organization, this totally violates transparency. And so that's probably my number one concern. So it sounds like, having a actual document from you is being asked. And so I'm okay with that. As far as Thursday morning, I've got from 8 to 8:30, and I've got from 9:30 to about 10:30-ish.
Repeat that for me again, I'm sorry. 8 to 8?
Yeah, I've got an 8:30 to 9:30 meeting with constituents.
Yeah.
And then another one at 10:30 that is kind of
Okay.
flexible, but so I'm open basically best from 9:30 to 10:30.
Yeah. I'm not available till 10, but I could do the 8 to 8:30. Commissioner Rogers, I understand you have limited availability.
How about noon? Or is everybody out for noon? Nope, Jerry's saying no. I'm basically tied up between about 9:15 and noon.
Okay.
Unless I sneak out.
Could you participate in a phone meeting for you? You know, you're participating by phone. Could you do it between 8 and 8:30?
Right?
Yes.
Are you talking me? Yeah. I think that's it. Right. I could do that.
Commissioner
Yes.
Fry and Commissioner Trees, can you do that?
I have a constituent meeting, but I think I can move that. I'm going to say yes, this is important, and I can move the constituent meeting.
Commissioner Fry?
I have JPAC.
I can read lips.
Oh, I wasn't mic'd. I mean, I'm mic'd. I apologize. Okay, well, how about this? We do 8 to 8:30, and then Commissioner Fry, as soon as you're out of JPAC, I'll bring you up to speed and go from there. Okay. Staff, Ms. Angie, can you guys get us noticed for a meeting 8 to 8:30 on Thursday?
Yes, I'd like county council to weigh in because I'm thinking of the rules and I believe we need 72 hours notice. Is that accurate, Alan?
We can do it since the rules allow us to have a meeting every day of the week. We can do that on Thursday.
Okay.
So just get the notice out as soon as possible.
Okay. Just want to make sure.
Yep. And the topic can be Metro SHS proposal. Okay.
But we'll get even before that, we'll get a draft letter. Is that correct?
Yes.
Perfect.
Yes, I will endeavor to get you a draft letter and everything written sometime tomorrow, as soon as Elizabeth and I can. She and I work together and have crafted no less than 2 different versions of memos. So.
When did this start?
I knew that they were doing a budget note going into last Tuesday and their work session, but their packet for work session had a document, and then there was another document that our staff sent me on Wednesday, and I got an alert from someone else Wednesday, and I jumped on it right away, doing outreach, research, and haven't stopped.
I was just curious. Thank you.
Yep. So, okay. So that's it for Metro SHS for the day. So Commissioner Trees, thank you for staying, and we'll move on to leadership communication. And I apologize to our senior leadership team for the helter-skelter today, and quite a change by Commissioner Trees in our setup today. Thank you for being nimble.
No worries, Chair Harrington, and I don't want to speak for Alan and Diane, but being flexible and nimble is the name of the game. So thanks for the opportunity. Just a logistical with the meeting going long today and also the staff needing to get this meeting notice posted. The broadcast for the June 22nd packet will not go out tomorrow. I'm confident you're not searching for that to read it tonight, but just wanted to let you be aware there is a change in timing. Good news, want to share through the Oregon Economic Development Association, Washington County has been named with it as a distinguished entry. We didn't get the top submission, but a distinguished entry for outstanding collaboration. And this is the approach to distribution of CRF funds in a collaborative manner with community partners. Some areas that they had focused on in this award were business recovery centers, workforce initiatives, childcare, business grants, support for cities and special service districts. I could go on and on, but in the spirit of time, I won't. Matt Craigie is prepping comments for the showcase, which I believe is coming up already next week. We just received this notice. So more information will be sent to the board, but just this is a reflection of the board's strategic thinking and guidance and distribution of the CRF funds. So sometimes we need to pause and celebrate. So I wanted to make sure to share that with you today.
Well, good work from the agency as well, because while we on the board were very thoughtful in adopting that strategic framework, we had terrific support and follow through from our staff and all of our community partners, particularly on the result report. Not only were we successful in programming $104 million out to our community, but we did so with great discipline and really heartfelt stories and a great, easy to read report. So thank you. And we'll look forward to a written email update from you on all of that.
So now I want to transition into leaf blower update. Briefing memo will land in your email box. I did promise I would report back to the board today, so thank you for allowing me the time. Just in a couple sentences, our operational procedures and protocols actually align with Portland's resolution. And so what does that mean? That means that our leaf blowers have transitioned to electric, and we only use the gas blower operator, when operations, so wet leaves, when it's too heavy to blow. And that is consistent with Portland. And there is the clause within the resolution. I also want to take the opportunity to share the follow-up that staff had with Ms. Mates. And I'm going to share the quote from their correspondence. Thank you so much for your thorough and informative response. This answered all of my questions, and I'm happy to know you are thinking so carefully about how to be as careful as possible with our environment. The reason for sending this briefing memo also is I think it's helpful, even though this is a very small slice of our operations, the briefing memo will give you insight into how the staff team thinks about operationalizing sustainability in Washington County operations. And both myself and Clean Water Services CEO Diane Tadaguchi-Dennis really look forward to the roundtable discussion on August 5th to update the board on both agencies' efforts. Relative to COVID, and I'll pause there. Were there any questions? Okay. Relative to COVID, Washington County is at 71% vaccination rate. So we are really leading the way into helping reach the statewide vaccination rate. This week, statewide, we are at 67.9%. So that we need 71,522 more residents to have at least their first dose. Keep in mind, last week when I updated the board, we were at about 109,000 more. So we have made progress statewide in the last week. So that's.
I can give you an update on that. Per Governor Brown, who managed to call back over our lunch break, well, such as it was for me. The state just needs 67,000 more people to get vaccinated. So once again, if you know anybody, get them vaccinated as quick as you can. And they can get entered into that statewide lottery.
Thank you for that updated information. That's good news. And I'm happy to report we do not have any positive cases or employees in quarantine status. So good progress. And that concludes my update.
And for me, since I'm flexible and nimble, I have nothing to, to comment on.
Okay, well, let's see. Your last meeting with us is going to be next Tuesday, June 26th.
Next Tuesday. That's right. My last meeting, night meeting, is very fitting.
That's great. And your last day in the office, so to speak, will be Friday, the 25th?
That's correct. And then Tom starts Monday. Well, I'll be talking to Tom.
Yes, thank you very much for ensuring a smooth transition as well, not only for your role as general counsel, but also for your team members as well. So.
Thank you. Yeah, Tom's meeting with the team tonight, so he's going to go out and sit down and have a big powwow and have some beverages and go over what's going to happen. So.
Okay, and is it, pardon me, is it Elmer or Paul or both who are also retiring this month?
They're both retiring. No, Elmer will be next month, but Paul will be this month too.
Right, right. Well, they've each been valued long-term employees here at Washington County. And I know in my short time on the Board of Commissioners, 2.5 years, I have felt well served by them with their information as well as their judgment. So I've conveyed that to them.
Great, and I'll make sure they hear that.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
So thank you, Alan. And next we'll move on to Diane Taniguchi-Dennis, our Clean Water Services CEO.
Thank you, Chair Harrington, and good afternoon, Board of Clean Water Services. I'll be pretty quick. I did want you to know there is a multi-state emergency going on as it relates to the water sector. The major manufacturing company for sodium hypochlorite has equipment failure, and they're still unsure when they're going to be able to bring that manufacturing equipment back online. So it's creating a very significant shortage of sodium hypochlorite. This is a very important chemical, both to drinking water and wastewater utilities, because we use it for disinfection. Right now, the Clean Water Services team, we've always said we're at our best when things are at its worst. So they have multiple strategies they're working on. We do have a 10-day supply at the Durham treatment plant. We're looking at Rock Creek's supply, but we're closely coordinating. There is going to be a briefing chair to the governor's office. So if you get called upon, you can say that you're aware of it. Clean Water Services is pretty lucky so far. We do believe we're still going to get our load of chemical on Monday. At least that's what the vendor is saying, but we're pretty much monitoring the situation. We do have alternative vendors, so the team is contacting them. I am going to put a provision of emergency in place so that we can get the chemical from whatever vendor has it available. And then the final backup plan, there's an alternative disinfection chemical called peracetic acid that here in the state of Oregon, DEQ is going to be looking at working with some of the utilities to utilize it as an interim disinfection method. So it is a very significant issue for all water purveyors in the Oregon and Washington area. I don't know if it's extended beyond Oregon and Washington, but it very well may be. There's been lots of news about shortages of chlorine throughout the press, whether it's a pool or other things, but this is very real for the water sector. So that we'll keep you apprised of what we're doing. The second thing is we have some good news. We have not had any positive COVID cases for 3 weeks, but we are managing one employee who's had a exposure because of a family member that has tested positive. We're currently at 52% fully vaccinated at Clean Water Services, and that's really of the people that have voluntarily reported to us. So the team is continuing to report and going through the full vaccination status. So that's all I have to report today about Clean Water Services.
One of the things that was on Governor Brown's mind when she and I were able to connect earlier is that if people of eligible age for vaccination, so currently that's 12 years of age and up, if we fail to get vaccinated and if we get COVID, if we have young children in our household, it will require that those children quarantine for up to 2 weeks. And I got to tell you, with the school year ending and it being summer, no kid wants to quarantine for 2 weeks in the summer. Or at least when I was a kid and had chicken pox and had to stay inside in the summer, I was not a happy Catherine. I would rather be outside any day of the week. So I'm just hoping that everyone that is health eligible for the vaccine will get vaccinated. It's your best tool for staying healthy. So I know I keep saying that, preaching to the choir, I know. Thank you. Well, that's it for leadership updates. Commissioner Fye, Rogers, Willie, anything else for the good of the order today? Thank you for hanging in there all day long, weighing in on all of our topics. You're great colleagues. I'm grateful for it. We'll see no further comments. It looks like we can adjourn for the day, Tuesday, June 15th, 2021. That's it, folks. Enjoy your evening. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Commissioners.